Do you ever feel like you're getting old? Like how one of your favorite TV shows peaked a decade ago, and it's been all downhill ever since? Anyway, welcome to my ranking of Generation 1 of My Little Pony. My name is John, and for the past few months I've been watching through every episode of this first generation, consisting of two specials, the 1986 movie, and the My Little Pony and Friends TV show. Watching through this older version of My Little Pony has been a lot of fun and actually quite insightful. But now it's time to review and rank this generation from the bottom to the top. The bottoms being my least favorite episodes and the tops being my favorite. Now it's important to point out that this first generation has a little bit of a different way of how they release episodes. Here's a brief bit of history. In 1984, the first 20-minute special, Rescue at Midnight Castle, was released. The main ponies in this were Twilight, Firefly, Applejack, and a couple obscure ones. We also followed the human Megan and Spike the Dragon. The next year of 1985 gave us the 20-minute special Escape from Katrina, where we had a completely different set of ponies, most of which were a new line of toys called the Baby Ponies. The only returning characters were Megan and Spike. Another year later, in 1986, we got the movie, where we once again have a completely different set of ponies, with only a couple returning from the previous special. The main ponies consisted of Gusty, Shady, Fizzy, Windwhistler, Magic Star, Baby Lickety Split. Once again, Megan and Spike are what link everything together. And then a few months later, we got My Little Pony and Friends, which has all the ponies from the movie, with new ones being introduced throughout the show. The second season in particular contains many new toy lines, but this time we have shorter episode lengths. Each individual episode is about 10 minutes long. However, each story arc may range from 1 to 4 episodes, with the longest being 10 episodes. Eventually, the first two specials were re-released under the new 10-minute format, which unfortunately meant some material had to be cut for time, most of which were songs. To make this simple for this ranking, whenever I refer to an episode, I'll be talking about the full story, meaning the 4-part episode or the 10-part episodes, instead of just the individual parts. And on this ranking, I'll be reviewing things on how they connect to me. Quality, rewatchability, and intrigue are typically the key factors that determine what makes a standout episode for me. Remember to please keep in mind that everyone has different worldviews, interests, and experiences. So what I may like or dislike might be the complete opposite of yours. But don't let that bum you out. In the grand scheme of things, it's not that important. But in order to give each episode a fair deal, I made sure to watch each episode at least twice. With that said, let's get started with the ranking. Let's start with number 28, The Ice Cream Wars. So these two ice cream makers go to war over a misunderstanding, accusing each other of espionage. So this is an age-old episode concept that you'll find in so many different cartoons. A comparison would be in Generation 4's Hofield and McColt's. So this episode introduces us to a new set of ponies called the Teeth Ponies. One of them is an updated design for the character of Baby Lickety Split. We also have this duck pony. I don't know why they're a duck, but they're a duck. It's never explained, but they're a duck. A thing to point out is that these characters are introduced in the third to last episode of the show. So it's too late to really get invested in these characters. Not much time is really done to get invested in these characters, and, well, it takes away from the characters that you'll likely recognize in this show. It's really a hard time trying to find out who our main characters are because we're always being introduced to new sets of main characters. But the conflict of this episode happens because this guy loses his recipe and then immediately blames the toppings guy. Like, what's the toppings guy gonna need the ice cream recipe for? He makes toppings. It's just really dumb forced conflicts, and these characters are just really dumb. Like, their factories are full of so many OSHA violations. The ponies are leaving babies on active conveyor belts almost turning them into ice cream. And the ponies aren't really involved in this conflict outside of they're not making ice cream for them. And there's not really any time to give this conflict any oomph. The two opposing sides are just going to war and fighting with different ice creams, and then the ponies just conveniently find the recipe. They weren't even looking for it. It just so happens that the ice cream maker dropped his recipe in a vat of his own ice cream, and so they just open a random tub and there's the recipe. It's not great, it's a bit rushed, and for a lot of these reasons, it's at the bottom of my list. In the end, the story had no time to develop a stronger use of the concept or even a smart resolution. At number 27, we have Flight to Cloud Castle. So some ponies decide to help some random guy help save some random princess from some flying castle. This summary sounds much more interesting than the episode actually is. Once again, we're introduced to a brand new pony, Twilight 2.0. We have already been introduced to a Twilight in this show, but here we have a brand new Twilight who is officially called So Soft Twilight, but it's just called Twilight in the show, which can be confusing. The plot is similar to Shrek in a sense, where we have to save this sleeping princess from the castle tower, but it's hard to really get invested in this plot because the character that the ponies are trying to help is such a terrible character. His name is Garth, he complains about everything, he gives up easily, he's constantly berating the ponies. Why should we care about this challenge anyway? The challenges themselves aren't the most interesting. The most interesting part of this episode is somewhat of the reveal of the princess, which is a subversion of expectations.
Well, thank you all very much for coming and waking me, and now I must be going.
She doesn't really want to be part of a romance, but they end up together anyway because the ponies pressure her to do it. It's not great. This is also 2 parts, but there's not really a whole lot of story for 2 parts, so it just feels like it's bloated with a ton of action that's not the most impressive. In the end, due to too much time being spent on action and puzzle solving, we weren't able to really explore the characters of Garth and the princess or their proper motivations. At number 26, we have Little Piece of Magic. So the baby ponies hallucinate imaginary scenarios with some sort of sentient red ball. Alright, so this is the imagination episode that many cartoons feel like they need to include for some reason. But the thing is, these baby ponies don't need to be taught what imagination is. They just do it. They've been doing it. I will say that this episode does give some insights to the aspirations of these baby ponies, but none of that matters at all because we don't really see these characters a whole lot, or really ever after this point. There's not really much here besides the weirdness of this red ball. It's not terrible, but it's not the most interesting. In the end, the episode gave us fun but weird experiences with the baby ponies, but little in terms of conflict or coherent plot. At number 25, we have Woe Is Me. So a frogman with the curse of bad luck gets help from the ponies. First up, these ponies are ruthless.
Everything's gonna be okay. Nothing's gonna be okay until that walking bad luck charm is gone.
There's this really funny moment where the ponies think he's dead.
He's so still. Is he? You're alive!
Also, is this supposed to be mud? Because the way it just comes out from him, it doesn't look like mud. It looks like something else. So the conflict with the frogman is that he's bad luck, and anywhere he goes, he causes bad luck, which usually means destruction to property or the land itself. And so the ponies have a song where they are trying to convince him to stay, and they do. But 2 seconds after the song ends, he changes his mind, so the song was completely pointless. The moral is just to believe in yourself, which is a solid moral, but not for the conflict of this episode. This episode has some good themes and ideas, but the resolution is just so clunky. In the end, we have a plot that I'm not too interested in and a solution that doesn't feel deserved. At number 24, we have the Great Rainbow Caper. So some technology-obsessed monkeys kidnapped Danny and Surprise so they could ransom them for the Rainbow Heart, which is his magical weapon that the ponies never use. It is their one defense mechanism that has worked so many times, and the explanation from Megan is that they should only use them for special occasion. The special occasion that they're using it for in this episode is to clear the weather so they could have a nice picnic. But not when they're, of course, being attacked by other creatures or being turned into slaves, which happens pretty much every episode. But it seems like in this episode that Megan is now a tyrant over these ponies. She's the one in charge. She seems to have all the control, which is kind of weird considering she's supposed to be a guest to these ponies, but she controls them here. Not much really happens in this episode. It is 10 minutes, so there's not much they can do. But the resolution is that Danny and Surprise are just annoying, and they're a nuisance to these monkeys, and so they win. Okay, what a moral. If you're in trouble, just be annoying, I guess. In the end, this wasn't much of a rainbow caper, and the antagonists were defeated in an unsatisfying way. At number 23, we have would-be Dragon Slayer. So, some random kid tries to kill Spike out of some misguided sense of righteousness. But these ponies are pretty helpful because they then decide to help him become a knight. So the kid, whose name is Alonzo, constantly struggles with jumping to conclusions. He tries to kill Spike because Spike is a dragon, and he assumes, dragons are evil. He wants to be a knight, but he can't be a knight because he's always making the wrong decision. I hear this singing from a distance. It must be from a princess, and the princess must be in danger, which isn't the case at all. But luckily, Alonzo gets tested by a wizard, and conveniently the wizard's like, Alonzo, you're pretty good. Guess you're a knight now. Like, that's pretty convenient. And there's just a whole lot that I think this concept needs to be and needs to spend time on. But this is only 10 minutes long. It really needed to be more than one part. In the end, the story featured a plotline that needed time to breathe and a short time length that ended up stunting its growth. For number 22, we have Sambula. So Sambula tries to gain power by hypnotizing the ponies with their desires, and she uses this power to make herself young again. This episode introduces us to the brand new toy set of the Big Brother ponies. So, this is really the first set of boy ponies we see in the show. We do see one or two sprinkled about here and there, but this is the first time we have, full-on main characters that are boy ponies. Unfortunately, though, this is the second to last episode, so they're introduced here, we never see them again. They're never mentioned any time before this. Unlike the Egyptian-themed pony that we got in G4, Sambula in this show is just some red-hooded Gothel woman, which is not the most memorable design considering all the other villains in this show. The real villain in this episode is Surprise, with her very hazardous attempt at surprising ponies by exploding a can of nails. Overall, I think the episode is just fine. The conflict is that the ponies are getting their youth sucked out, which is alright. In the end, we have a competently told story. However, my lack of enthusiasm for the New Brother ponies and my preference for G4 Sambula left this underwhelming. At number 21, we have The Quest of the Princess Ponies. Alright, so a bunch of snooty royal princess ponies argue about who should be queen, and then some lava demons break up the debate in order to steal some magic wands. Once again, in this season 2 episode, we're introduced to a whole new set of ponies. Here we have the princess ponies, and the princess ponies have magic wands. Why do ponies need magic wands? I don't know, but they do. And apparently, these ponies are in charge of the magical balance of this land. And this giant lava demon guy wants this magical power, And apparently having the magical power of the wands means you get turned into this crystal chicken. There's a lot of convenience in this episode, and you got a lot of time wasting with the Muchik. You have this ice tribe, they're pretty cool. You have the rainbow of light that returns, and then immediately gets lost, so they can't actually do anything with it. The moral of this story is that the princess ponies have to be less selfish. So, they have learned to be less selfish, but they never actually learned to be less selfish. This is something that we're told happened through a song.
They have learned to be less selfish. Yes, we have learned to be less selfish.
But nothing in the episode suggests anything about this. Anyway, apparently the magical balance of the world happens to be Kini Nui. If you get the reference, you're cool. So to defeat the monster, and the princesses decide that instead of having one of them be queen, they'll just have this rotating dictatorship where each one of them will serve a term of being queen. Queen over what? I don't know. In the end, more time was spent on the antagonists and the adventure, and very little time was spent on developing the princess ponies and their journey. At number 20, we have the Golden Horseshoes. So a pony named Mimic becomes ill due to poor genetics. And so the ponies go on this quest to find the Golden Horseshoes, which somehow fix her poor genetics. I don't know, the magicalness of this is weird. I will say this episode does treat us with some very fancy lighting at times, which is pretty cool. Not something we see a whole lot of in the show. So the conflict is that the pony Mimic is sick, and the way the animators decide to describe her being pale is to make her transparent. Except nobody notices that she's transparent. They call her pale, which makes the characters seem kind of dumb when they're like, I wonder what it is. So the Golden Horseshoes themselves are these magical horseshoes that each have a very different specific power that one pony had at some point. But like, they're a very odd variety of powers that don't really seem to go together. So this episode is pretty much a fetch quest where they have to go and find the horseshoes. Not all the quests in this episode are interesting or well done. I'm gonna let this scene speak for itself.
Take them to the horseshoe!
It's here! Somewhere.
We'll never find it in all this. Everyone listen. This horseshoe has the power of light. So that's what we look for. You mean like the one by Cracker's foot? I'll get it out.
Uh-oh.
Look out!
You saved Cracker, so I order a hole to be dug to the goblin tunnels.
A sad thing to point out is that this is the last Megan episode of season 2, which is a shame because there were still a couple more episodes after this point. And Megan's like the kind of the main character of the show. In the end, this shared similarities to an episode later on in this ranking that just did it much better. While this is a solid adventure, not every part of this was engaging to watch. At number 19, we have Baby, It's Cold Outside. Alright, so some penguins decide to take over the world through global cooling. The bad guy of this episode is this ruthless Emperor Penguin who is a terrible father.
What's wrong with being a duck?
They're weak.
How?
Can they withstand the cold?
Why should we have to?
He's been a bad influence on you.
The plot of this episode is pretty straightforward, and it doesn't really take the ponies that long to find out what's happening. Half the time spent is on avoiding traps, really. This episode does feature this pretty rad song.
We're not gonna freeze. That isn't the path we've chosen.
The conflict of this episode is resolved really easily, and all it takes is the father to murder his own child to realize that he was bad. The ponies weren't really needed for this one. In the end, we are left with moments of solid stuff and moments of time-filling adventure that don't have much to connect with each other. At number 18, we have Pony Puppy. So the ponies adopt a giant puppy but underestimate the responsibility. So this episode features a different combination of ponies that we would see throughout the show, but never in this specific combination. It's unclear whether or not the conflict is taking care of the puppies, a lot of responsibility, or I have no idea, actually. And the conflict resolution is pretty much non-existent. There's not really much of a conflict. They just take care of this giant puppy, they complain about how much resources it takes to feed him, and then the puppy leaves. The moral, if there is a moral, isn't set up all that well. In the end, we have an underdeveloped plot and an anticlimactic resolution. At number 17, we have the end of Flutter Valley. So the witches team up with some bees on a plot to kick the Flutter Ponies out of Flutter Valley. This is 10 parts long. This does not need to be 10 parts long. There's not enough plot for this to be 10 parts. And so because of that, there's a lot of running in circles, a lot of repeated moments of the ponies getting captured, escaping the next episode, getting captured again in the exact same way, constantly repeating the same dialogue of, oh, we gotta do this by this a certain amount of time. Every episode is the exact same thing. In order to fill 10 parts, they have the fur bobs and the stone bats, but that conflict kind of gets in the way of the main point of the story of the bees and the witches. Some of the songs are pretty good. Others feel like they're a waste of time. There are some cute story bits, but this didn't need to be 10 episodes. In the end, the bloat of runtime, characters, repetitive scenes, and unconnected subplots made this a chore to go through. At number 16, we have Escape from Katrina. So Katrina's work slaves escape, and she plans on using ponies instead. This is a really odd second experience for ponies. There are two very conflicting arcs. You have plot A, which is slavery and Katrina getting power or something, and you got plot B, which is babysitting. None of these plots really have anything to do with each other. Katrina as a villain can be effective in that she steals the Rainbow Heart weapon and she has power, but she's also very ineffective. The ponies don't feed her at all and she's easily defeated. And unfortunately, you don't really get a sense about Katrina as a character. And part of this, of course, is that when they re-released this episode, they cut out a song from the original airing. And the song is actually really important because it explains part of Katrina's motivation and backstory. But they cut that out for some stupid reason. And just like the very first episode of My Little Pony, the cast of ponies in this episode don't ever come back again. In the end, we are left with a disconnect between plots and an underwhelming villain. At number 15, we have the Glass Princess. So some birds kidnap ponies in order to use their hair as material for a magic cloak that gives some sort of tyrannical pig the power to turn things into glass. The motivation of the villains are bizarre. The birds, they want a home to live, and their plan is to turn Ponyland into glass. But like, why? Why do the birds want to live in glass? How did this pig come into power? Why does this pig come into power? We don't know. Vanity is a theme of this episode, but that's not the big thing that this pig struggles with. Her struggle is the moral conundrum of murdering ponies. She was fine with turning into glass from a distance, but once she actually saw that they were living and breathing, she's like, oh no, I can't do that. The final confrontation itself is just a lesson in stupidity. Characters just stand there and let the villains do things and get away when they really shouldn't. In the end, we have a lack of villain motivation and messy resolution. At number 14, we have the Ghost of Paradise Estate. So a bird pretends to be a ghost so that she can get a magic amulet in order to free her grandfather who is being imprisoned by a tyrannical squid. So one of the first things I noticed about this episode in particular is that we have a new voice actress for the character of Megan. And the reason why she stood out in this episode as opposed to the End of Flutter Valley is because of her song. Megan, when she would sing in previous episodes, actually had a really fantastic song. But this new VO can't quite sing.
To your beds, douse the light, and put your sleep If a ghost appears in this location, don't get in a state of agitation. It's all in your imagination. It's all in your imagination.
Also, apparently this magical amulet has the power to do anything, but the villain, the squid, only uses it for lasers. In the end, the villain doesn't live up to his potential, and the plot goes in odd directions. At number 13, we have the movie. So some volcano witches are sick of the happiness that they see, so they release the Smooths on Ponyland, and the ponies journey to find and help save the day. This film has just too many unnecessary scenes and bits and sequences that have nothing to do with the plot and don't really help the plot. They're really just there to help lengthen the time. But this film also has plenty of random funny lines.
Maybe it's going to rain. Maybe we'll get all wet and catch pneumonia.
Some of the songs are fun, others okay, but really this film has too many characters to keep track of. In the end, the lack of necessary material for the runtime and the massive bloat of characters and barely put together story makes this a sometimes fun but tedious watch. At number 12, we have Mishmash Melee. So the ponies accidentally upset the balance of nature, which causes them to switch personalities. This is a very bizarre concept that the balance of nature is a bunch of like these Star Trek tribbles, and they're contained in a barrel. This is only 10 minutes long, so there's really no time to really get all into that, and so everything is done in lightning pace, and everything is resolved quickly. There's no time to explore the concept of the characters' personalities being switched. But it is really fun to see the characters being switched, especially Fizzy and Windwhistler. They have great personalities to be switched. In the end, the short runtime doesn't allow for further exploration of a fun but odd concept. At number 11, we have Spike's Search. So Spike tries to learn how to be a dragon. This is kind of just the plot of Dragon Quest, but instead of the dragons here being teenagers like in the G4 show, here the dragons are like part of the mafia in some sort of racketeering on different villages. Spike in this episode is really innocent, but he's also really foolish, leading the dragons to Ponyland, and the plan that the ponies have to defeat the dragons is just to get them wet, and hopefully that will bum them out to the point that they leave. The plan works, by the way. In the end, the short runtime gives us an anticlimactic resolution to a solidly built plot. At number 10, we have Crunch the Rock Dog. So Crunch attempts to petrify anything resembling happiness. The episode begins with the ponies telling a bedtime story, and the bedtime story ends with death, which is an odd thing to give a bedtime story to baby ponies. They're crying and everything. Windwhistler, who is the logical pony, who's kind of like Spock, is being ostracized for being too logical. However, whenever Megan gives the same advice, she gets respect. The ponies in this episode are kind of like out of character and impulsive. They keep doing dumb things that get them into trouble, and very illogical. We have a talking mountain who has this heart stone, but what I really like about this episode is Windwhistlers Revenge.
Go ahead. I don't care what you do with her.
You're crazy if you think I'll buy that.
I'm perfectly serious. I've been surrounded by these romantic idiots for so long, it is refreshing to find one such as yourself.
Windwhistler, how could you?
Pay no attention to them, Crunch.
You really don't care what I do to her?
That sentimental fool? Certainly not.
Good, 'cause I'm gonna turn her to stone.
In the end, I wish the other ponies didn't have to be mean or inept in order to make Windwhistler's logic superior. At number 9, we have the Return of Talon. So the creatures of Ponyland get imprisoned in the legendary Talon by Grogar and his minions. This was the part in the show where I realized that there are two versions of each pony. Your regular pony and then the baby pony. And we are revealed to this by having duplicate ribbons. You have ribbons and baby ribbons. Both look exactly the same, both have exactly the same cutie mark. Which makes watching this show so confusing because you can never tell which version of the character we're getting unless someone specifically mentions their name. But this episode features Grogar, and Grogar is a pretty cool and menacing villain. It's a shame that the episode doesn't really utilizes the concept featured here at its fullest potential. The plan of the ponies is to use a tape recorder on Grogar, and it works.
You're wrong, boy. I've got you surrounded.
Grogar keeps the bell that can defeat him in his own castle out in the open. We have a convenient turncoat that's not set up all that well. It's great to see Grogar, and it's great to see all the different characters and creatures that we've seen in the show so far. And the final confrontation is told through song, which is pretty cool. But this episode is kind of disappointing because it could be so great, but it just falls short. In the end, we see glimpses of a great story that unfortunately never reaches its full potential due to a lack of or runaway imagination. At number 8, we have Bright Lights. So some baby ponies get tricked into the entertainment business that steals their shadows. This episode is just a wild concept that, especially with what we have going on in today's environment, is making this so much more interesting to watch. You have like an analogy of how the entertainment business exploits children. You have this villain who's kind of like Harvey Weinstein, and he sucks out the shadows from ponies, which could be the implication of their souls, how the business takes their souls. But this episode is just animation errors galore. Shadows are an important part of this episode, except the animators never put the shadows in, only when they're about to be taken. You have characters who just appear and disappear. You have mice that the animators just can't keep track of who the mice are, which really kind of shows that each part of the story was done by a different team of people who didn't know what the other team was doing. The plan that the ponies have to defeat this character is just to walk up to him and tell him to stop. This episode is actually quite fun for the first 2 parts, but once we get to part 3, everything falls apart. And by the end, the Flutter ponies just show up without any announcement and they defeat the villain. In the end, we have a story that starts out strong that eventually falls apart due to filling the runtime and the lack of communication within the animation team. At number 7, we have Through the Door. So the ponies accidentally set fairy tale characters loose on Ponyland. So a thing to point out is that the ponies that set the conflict into motion are just really nosy. There's this keep out sign on the door that says keep out.
It says keep out. Well, they couldn't mean us, Paradise.
North Star is such a terrible pony. It is really weird to see the fictional characters interact with the ponies. And there's also some interspecies mingling. Like, Prince Charming is down for anything. Apparently, the consequences of having the fairy tale characters in Ponyland is that the words disappear from books. I don't know how that works, but okay. In the end, we have a wild experience of mixing ponies and fairy tale legends, with bizarre plot points that don't make the most sense. At number 6, we have the Revolt of Paradise Estate. So the estate is in disrepair, and a stranger gives ponies magic paint that fixes everything, but also gives life. So how did the Paradise Estate get so bad? Why is it in disrepair? I don't know. But the ponies, when they get the paint, just decide to paint everything, including the furniture. And that brings everything to life. It's really weird and lots of fun, but really it's the implications that get weird. And you ask yourself, when does this get weird?
Uh-oh, I need more water.
I'll get it. Fill her up, buddy. Oh, that tickles.
When does the moral ambiguity of it come into conflict? So, are like your chairs and your plates and stuff, are they still your property if they have sentience? Is this legal? What's the ethical thing to do? Also, where's the rest of the ponies? We're only featuring a handful of ponies, but not the wider realm of ponies. It turns out all of this is just a real estate scheme, and everything happily gets turned back to normal, meaning everything dies in the end, technically. It's weird, but kind of a lot of fun to watch. In the end, the weird implications and wild choices make this an entertaining watch. At number 5, we have The Prince and the Ponies. So, the French imprison the ponies in order to make them pets and slaves. So, this is the last episode of the show, and we feature the new teeth ponies that we were introduced to a couple episodes ago, and the BT. We have no Megan, we have no A-team of characters, it's just a random set of ponies. And it turns out that our tweens, teeth ponies, are jealous of the babies for getting attention, and they have a whole song about how they'd be happy if their babies were put into slavery. This episode is only 10 minutes long, and there is a lot going on with a very fast pace, but it does it really well. Yeah, ponies with sword fights as well. I actually kind of wish that this was 2 parts. Even if it's just 10 minutes long, it actually does it in a really solid job. In the end, we are left with a strong episode despite the short length and lack of favorite characters. At number 4, we have Sweet Stuff and the Treasure Hunt. So, Sweet Stuff has a hard time fitting in and feels left out. This is an episode that I didn't think a whole lot of when I first watched it, but on my second watch through, it was actually quite surprisingly good. And the thing that I really connected to in this episode is the character of Sweet Stuff, who's having trouble fitting in with the other ponies. There is some implication that Sweet Stuff is kind of supposed to be a neurodivergent character. However, I'm not sure if that was the intention. I think what the writers were trying to do is that Sweet Stuff is actually the only Earth pony in this episode, and she's having trouble fitting in with Earth ponies and sea ponies and flying ponies because when they try and play their games, she can't keep up. Unicorns, they teleport all the time. Pegasi, they're fast and they fly and she can't keep up. Sea ponies are just mean.
Oh, I get it now. I'm being used as a goalpost.
But, it turns out Sweet Stuff was the smart one and knew what the answer was. So the answer to some riddle was the Bushwillies. But I don't think Megan asked the Bushwillies permission if they could be part of the scavenger hunt. Sweet Stuff just brings them. Megan's like, yes, they're the answer. Unfortunately though, the song at the end, which is quite fun, and actually quite good, is not integrated really well. In the end, the character of Sweet Stuff and the moral elevate what is a pretty basic and sometimes lackluster plot. At number 3, we have Fugitive Flowers. So some escaped convicts trick the ponies into attacking the police. The plot of this episode is pretty much bridal gossip, but better. It's the whole don't judge a book by its cover, but it's done in a much better format here. So we have flowers, and we have these crabs. The crabs look scary, and the ponies think that they're evil. The flowers, they look pretty, and so the ponies decide to help them. But it turns out the crabs are actually the police. And the leader crab is voiced by Optimus Prime.
Transform and roll out.
And it also turns out that the ponies are prepared to take prisoners, because they imprison the police in this shady jail cell at the edge of a cliff. Why do the ponies have that? I don't know. We never see it again, but it has some weird implications going on. This episode is actually pretty solid, and I do quite enjoy it. In the end, we have a story that delves strongly into its morals and makes it engaging to experience. And number 2, we have the Magc Coins. So the ponies find some Magc Coins and make wishes until they begin to backfire, such as the land is burning. What I like about this episode, it has a very efficient use of its parts. Part 1, they find the coins, they use them, turns out it causes some trouble. Part 2, they find the owner and learn of a way to reverse the effects. Part 3, the ponies go on fetch quests to find the treasure to replace the coins. And Part 4, they find an alternate solution. Unlike many other episodes that don't really have enough to fill the 4 parts, each conflict for each episode are solid and they feel part of the adventure instead of time fodder. And the song, What Do You Give to a Troll, actually does a really good job at the mindsets of the characters singing the song. And the solution's pretty fun and pretty solid. In the end, the efficient structure of the story and the lack of noticeable time wasting make this an easy and fulfilled experience. And at number 1, we have Rescue at Midnight Castle. So T-Rex kidnaps ponies for his evil purposes. So the pony Firefly finds help in Megan to thwart him. This first episode is a lot of fun and a lot of bizarreness. T-Rex makes for a great menacing villain. We have the sea ponies here. They have a catchy song. They look weird. The best part for me of this episode is just Megan. She has this whole crisis of her entire world falling apart. Her reaction to everything from the ponies to the dragons is just so funny. Like, the ponies kidnap this random girl and she's forced to fight dragons and stop the forces of evil. Like, she had no idea any of this stuff existed and she's thrust into it. This is actually not a bad start to the ponies and probably the episode that most bronies would ever watch from the show, which is actually kind of great because this is actually my favorite part of the ponies. This has a memorable cast of ponies, partially due because these ponies make up the G4 ponies essentially. These ponies featured in this episode never returned to the show, so this is their only episode, but it's a really solid episode. In the end, we have a solid and memorable introduction to the world of My Little Pony, even if things seem weird and underdeveloped. So that was my ranking for this generation of episodes. Whether or not you agree or disagree with my ranking, please let me know in the comments what you think of these episodes. I'll be back next time to rank and review G 1.5's My Little Pony Tales. And if you want to check out my initial reactions until then, click the link in the description below. Thank you all for watching and I'll see you all next time. Bye.